Hello, it's Dr. Rebecca Cardona here with Fear Nothing Coaching. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit and share a little bit about burnout. Burnout is something that we've all heard about. And I think it's fair to say that we will probably each experience some form of burnout sometime within our life cycle. So, what is burnout? Burnout is emotional, mental, or physical exhaustion. Now, that exhaustion can be just straight up emotional, it can be straight up mental, or straight up physical, or it could be all three of those or a combination of the three of those. And that exhaustion is usually related to some type of repeated stressor or stressors that are occurring in our life. So now that we have a pretty good, simple definition of burnout, where may it show up in our life? Okay, if we're experiencing that or somebody that we love is experiencing that, where may it show up? Well, burnout can show up in our intimate or romantic relationships and definitely cause challenge and stress there. It can show up in our parenting, how we interact with our kids, how we discipline our kids, how we're able to be present with our kids or not present with our kids, our frustration levels, so forth and so on. It could show up in our caretaking relationships. So if we are caretaking for, our parents or another family member, it can definitely show up there as well. It can show up in our work relationships, and that is to include our quality of work and how we go about being able to have work satisfaction as well as how we deliver within our work environment. And a lot of people don't think of this, but it also shows up, burnout also shows up in relationship to ourselves. So decreased self-awareness, decreased self-esteem, decreased motivation. And oftentimes people will tell me that they just, kind of feel like that they're just running on that automated or automatic pilot mode. So now we know a simple definition of burnout. We know where it may show up. How may it show up, right? We talked about the different dimensions that it could show up in. So how may it show up? It could show up, it's going to be unique to each of us, and it could show up in these areas, a mixture of these areas, or even others that I don't mention. But burnout can show up in the form of anger. It can show up in the form of irritability or dread. Definitely a feeling of emptiness or hopelessness or a lack of interest. Also, burnout can show up in being very skeptical, right? Very distrusting, very doubtful of things, very doubtful of good outcomes. And as we're managing this exhaustion and we're managing these symptoms and how this exhaustion is showing up, it is very easy for us to develop unhealthy or unrelationships with things like alcohol, or food, or spending, or even drugs. So burnout can definitely show up in an increase in unhealthy or unhelpful habits that we may be developing in our life. Burnout definitely is going to decrease your overall health and well-being, just depending on how long it stays around. But health-wise, physical health-wise, it can show up in the form of headaches or fatigue or depressive symptoms or anxious symptoms. It can show up in a disruption of sleep or inability to sleep. And it can definitely show up in other physical health elements or diagnosis, as well as other mental health elements or diagnosis. So now that we know what burnout is, where it may show up, how it may show up, we're going to take a look at what should I or what can I do about it, if you're the one experiencing it or somebody that you love is experiencing burnout. And before I get into the specifics, I want to compare burnout to the burning of a wire. And that will make sense as I talk a little bit more about what can we do about it or what should I do about it. So when a wire actually burns, It's because of insulation failure and an excessive current flow above the capacity of the wire to handle it. So insulation failure, I compare to self-care, okay? And excessive current flow above capacity is that we're taking on too much, way much more than the emotion, the mind, and the physical body can truly handle over an extended period of time. So lack of self-care with excessive current or flow or stimulation in some domain of our life, relationships, work, parents, and it could be many of those, not just one. So with that, what can you do? The very first thing, since I have the comparison of the wire and the insulation failure, is going to be self-care. And oftentimes when I'm coaching clients, their understanding of self-care is something that's selfish and that's going to take away from their value at work or their value in their parenting relationship or their value with their partner. And that is an absolute myth. Self-care is not at all about selfishness. It's actually about maintenance and refueling so that you can show up in an adequate form and strong in those dimensions that you care about, parenting, relationships with your significant other, at work. So it's about refueling and maintenance. And self-care, just like the symptoms of burnout, are going to be very unique to the individual. So you have to experiment to figure out what is self-care for you. Oftentimes people have no clue about self-care, and then they feel guilty about being able to engage in it, feeling like that it's going to decrease in their value when it's actually opposite. It's going to increase their value and how they show up with themselves and thus with others. So some examples of self-care, it can be again, different for different people, but some people may want to go hunting or fishing. Other people, they may engage in artistic, artwork, painting or drawing. They may even want to enter into, creative arts and crafts. For other people, it, may be some soft music and a bubble bath or a glass of wine, in their tub that's quiet and that helps them decompress. For others, it may be, lifting weights or running or walking. For others, it may be nature. So again, it's really being able to get out there and explore what type of self-care reduces, right, that excessive current flow, allows you to recenter, and then thus refuel. So when I'm teaching people about self-care and well-being and that guilt factor comes in, I give the example of, I want you to think about you're going on a trip and you've got to get from point A to point B. Are you going to pick a car that is fueled and well-maintained? Or are you going to pick a car that has limited fuel to no fuel and that hasn't been maintained? Now, if you pick the car that's got limited fuel and it really hasn't been maintained, you may get from point A to point B, but it's definitely going to be a lot harder. And you may break down. And that breakdown for us may be in the form of emotional, mental, or physical, right? Some of those symptoms that I talked about. So think about self-care as getting in this car that is well-fueled and it's well-maintained with the point of being able to get from A to B and doing it effectively and efficiently. So self-care is tremendous in what you can or should do about burnout. The second is balance, right? So again, balance is unique. I never have a prescription that works for all. So let's use work, right? What is a better balance for you in your work relationship that would then combat that exhaustion around that emotional, mental, or physical, those physical exhaustion symptoms that you may be having in relationship to a stressor? So what's a better balance in work? What's a better balance in your intimate relationship? What's a better balance in relationship to you being a parent or a caretaker? And don't forget that ever most important relationship, what's a better balance with you? As humans, we are our hardest critics. And most of the time, everybody that I work with, the hardest person on themselves is themselves. So how do you have a better balance in relationship with yourself, right? Just something to begin to think about. So we've got balance, we've got self-care. Also, something that helps combat, burnout is being able to attach to meaningful interactions, whether that's in our work, our intimate relationships, with our children, and also with ourselves, right? Meaningful interactions, things that really drive something that fills us up. And finally, we have to be able to attach to purpose and passion in our life. If we keep pushing ourselves and we're not insulated, we're not taking care of ourselves, and we're having that excessive current flow, and there is no attachment to purpose or passion in what we're doing, we will no doubt experience that burnout, that emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion. So as I kind of wrap up our time together, one of the things that I would say is that if you are dealing with burnout and you want to have a burnout strategy, don't hesitate to reach out. Don't hesitate to reach out to a coach or somebody that you trust. And that way you can have that support and that guidance so you're not trying to do it all on your own. Okay, so that's our little talk on burnout, and Dr. Rebecca Cardona here with Fear Nothing Coaching. And I hope our time today was helpful. Have a good one.